I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, of course, remains the passing of former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon on Saturday, January 11th, at the age of 85. And you may have seen the memorial service for General Sharon on Shalom TV, which we televised live from the Knesset in Jerusalem in the early morning hours on Monday, 2:30 a.m. New York time, which was 9:30 in the morning in Israel. And then we had two encore showings later on Monday. And I also want to thank many of you who expressed your appreciation for our televising the ceremony. And many of you have been in touch asking if we'll be replaying it yet again. And I'm pleased to tell you that due to the many requests we've received, we will be replaying our coverage of the memorial service for Ariel Sharon this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. That's January 19th. So I hope if you missed the words of Shimon Peres and Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe Biden and Tony Blair, and some very moving personal memories shared by those who worked with and who served under Ariel Sharon, you'll have a chance to see it this Sunday. But right now, I have the wonderful pleasure of speaking with one of the individuals who was actually at the Knesset for the memorial service, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and you've seen him many times here on Shalom TV, a good friend, Malcolm Hoenlein, and he's calling from Athens, Greece. Malcolm, it's so good for you to join us once again.
It's always my pleasure from any part of the world.
Thank you.
To be in touch.
What was your role in Greece?
Well, I was part of the delegation that made the presentations to the officials and had extensive discussions. I had the opportunity actually to fly from Israel to Greece with the defense minister. So we had over a 2-hour discussion of the critical issues which face the region, which includes Iran. It includes the changes in Turkey, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. And our role here has been, together with the Hellenic leaders from the United States, to present this common front and to see what areas there are for further expansion of the Greek-American, Jewish-American relationship with Israel, with Greece, and in the region itself. And I have to say that we came away with many ideas and many suggestions, and we have talked to them about implementation. And in the discussions, which have been very intense, and it's a relatively small group, so it allows for a real interchange with the leaders here.
Okay, it sounds very promising, and I appreciate your giving us an update. Now, you were actually at the Knesset for the funeral of Ariel Sharon. You know, Malcolm, we saw it on television, but it's not anywhere near what it would be like had we been there. Can you give us the mood, and what was it like for you personally?
Well, I had, as you know, a very close relationship with Prime Minister Sharon, General Sharon, Minister Sharon over the years. It was both personal and professional. He is somebody who really appreciated the role of the diaspora and respected the input when presented intelligently and coherently to him. And you always knew when you scored a point because he would write it down. If you wrote it down, you know it was done. And he always saw himself not just as the Prime Minister of Israel, but the Prime Minister of the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. And as such, and beyond that, before his prime ministership, he always put an emphasis on Aliyah, but not to denigrate the diaspora communities, but seeing it as the fulfillment of Jewish life is coming to the state of Israel. And so he always had a respect, and he worked closely with us over the years on so many issues. So being there was very personal for me, and being part of this historic moment, which is really an end of an era, as the only leader of that generation. The two leaders who were still there were President Peres and former President Navon. And I had the opportunity, obviously, to see the Vice President and the members of his delegation and others who had come, and those were all nice benefits. But I felt really personally the obligation to show Hakarat Tov. I know many people have questions and raise issues. I think this is not the time for that. This is the time to recognize the contributions that General Sharon made to the security and defense of Israel. He clearly is in the pantheon of leaders of Israel, and that at this time of his passing, We should be recalling all of the amazing things that he did. Other issues will be left to history to decide.
Yes. At the same time, I do want you to help, for our audience, put General Sharon into perspective. He was, Malcolm, a controversial figure, not only in Israel, but certainly on the world stage. And, unfortunately, many Americans only know of him through the tragedy of Sabra and Shatila during the 1982 Lebanon War, when there was a massacre by Christians of Muslims in those Palestinian refugee camps, and Israel was held responsible for not putting a stop to it, and he was in charge at that point in time. And I'm asking you to help our audience understand the sweep of General Sharon, Prime Minister Sharon's career, and how it evolved over time, so that, and you may disagree with me, I felt that by the time he had, in essence, coordinated the withdrawal from Gush Katif and Gaza and taking Israel out of the Gaza Strip entirely, his reputation in Israel had gone through a bit of an evolution, from, on the one hand, being an individual who stood side by side with Menachem Begin and said, we're going to populate the West Bank, to moving off that position and becoming a really sophisticated and embracing prime minister of a greater vision for modern, contemporary Israel living in peace with the Palestinians. I wish you'd comment. Where do you think I'm right? Am I overstating it a bit? What's your perspective?
Wow, you asked many questions that really require numerous responses. For one, let me comment on the character of the person.
Yes.
He was very smart. He was a strategic thinker. He, as a military strategist, he probably had no peer. He did go through various transformations. I don't think it was a process of being more mature or more sophisticated, was the word you used, in his later years. He did go through a transformation, and here is the man who built settlements and then took down settlements, not just in Gaza, but 4 of them in the West Bank as well. And reports now indicate that he may have had other intentions. And, it is not unusual for leaders to go through a transformation. It is quite unusual, I think, to have such a radical change in what people's expectations of him. But I think whatever he did out of a commitment both to the Jewish character of the state and to the security of the state. This was his interpretation. He did not do it for the Palestinians. He would not have done it unilaterally, I think, if that was the case. I think he made this assessment about what would be best in the long term for Israel. Whether he's right or wrong, you'll have every point of view, and ultimately will be judged, if not already, by the events that followed. But the nature of his leadership has been lost in all the media reports, which, as you rightly point out, focused on Sabra and Shatila, for which he was not responsible, although he was, he had a certain amount of blame put on him for what others did or for his failure to prevent what others did. He also took the responsibility and took a heavy toll on Menachem Begin for the war in Lebanon. Begin supposedly said that he felt he was not given the full story and the full truth, etc. I think, again, we will find out much more as papers and other things reveal, but I don't know that we have a really clear understanding of that as yet. When you look at the overall life of the man, he was left for dead in the 1948 War of Independence. He was wounded during the Yom Kippur War. He led the charge against the Suez Canal, over the Suez Canal. He had the Third Army surrounded until pressure from the United States to release the hold on them. He certainly played a role in the 1956 war. So in all of those military conflicts, then he held various positions as Minister of Housing when he, in fact, did help build some of the communities in the West Bank, and certainly was an advocate for that. He was a Minister of Defense. He was Prime Minister, and a popular Prime Minister overall at the time. He was a thoughtful man, and again, he came off very gruff and looked tough by his size and his demeanor, but he was very soft at the same time. And I saw him do remarkable things when somebody wasn't well, or his inquiry, or the courtliness of the man, his special love with his wife, his family, his connection to them was reflected in their amazing love and care for him throughout these last 8 years. So it's a very complex picture, and it's being portrayed simplistically. I heard some really awful comments on the media, and yet when you heard what Vice President Biden said, what Tony Blair said, I met with many other officials who were here, who came for the funeral to Israel. Even those who were critical of him, all expressed real respect and recognition of the role he played and his integrity. And I think, with time, everybody's place becomes clarified. The turnout was not what I think people expected, because it's been 8 years. I remember a time when he first took ill and people expected him not to survive. Plans were made for a worldwide leadership assembly for his funeral. Over time, the interest dissipates, and most of the leaders who were in office when he took ill are no longer there. And yet, the comments were very moving, and you see the respect of the generals with whom he served, his colleagues in the army. I mean, one after another, the emotion that they displayed towards the man. And look at how strong his constitution was, that for 8 years he could survive when every doctors had long ago given him up. Even in the last days, he lasted much longer than the doctors predicted.
That's a wonderful description of him, Malcolm. That was very wonderful of you. Many of us who didn't know him intimately at all, there was a little bit of a surprise that many of the speakers at the ceremony referred to his love of the land and his ranch, but this connection to the land, the actual land of Palestine that became Eretz Yisrael and then is Israel, it seemed to be very, very important to him. And as I say, for many of us, that was a piece of him we did not know. I assume you did, but it must have also been powerful for you as you sat there listening to it as well.
Absolutely, but his love of his farm, and he would talk about things that happened. Somebody cited, the birth of a calf, and he would talk in the middle of a meeting with a head of state about the birth of a calf that took place, and he used to walk his land, he worked the land. It's a huge ranch, and has cattle, obviously other things as well, but he was intimately tied to it. It was his great love, and aside from his family and, of course, for the state of Israel, but he always talked about the land and about the connection to the land. And having grown up there, hearing the people, and as I said, hearing the military people, often when a commander, people who serve under them have great criticism and disaffection for him, he was very caring and concerned.
Yes.
And they spoke about individual cases, how he saved somebody's life. Yes. A young man had been left by his unit for dead, and he went in with a helicopter and saved him. And I saw it with my own family when they came to Israel to visit, and he invited them, and he spoke to them, and how, this big guy, this tank, would be a soft grandfather. And, he was a very complex person. And yet he's being portrayed in simplistic, one-dimensional portrayals in the media. And again, as I said, some terrible things. I saw one really completely one-sided, and seeing the pictures of the Palestinians celebrating. And yet he was the one who gave up Gaza. He was the one who was working towards peace. And they are giving out candy to celebrate the death of Ariel Sharon.
Yes. I want to ask one delicate question, Malcolm. Was there anything inappropriate about the fact that President Obama did not attend the ceremony?
No, I don't think that anybody expected him to come. John Kerry, many people had speculated that Kerry would come, but he was tied up in Paris at the meetings on Syria and Iran, and in fact that precluded quite a number of the foreign ministers who were originally supposed to attend, including Lavrov of Russia, who had responded, and instead the president, the chairman of the Duma of the parliament, came. I know that in regard to the delegation from the United States, that Republican congressional leaders were approached and other members, but because it was on such short notice and because there were major bills being dealt with, that they couldn't come. So it wasn't that they were excluded. And again, when somebody's out of office for so long, this is not, on the level of God forbid, a head of state who was an incumbent passing away.
So one more question on this. How do you believe he will be remembered? What will be his lasting legacy, Malcolm?
Well, I think given the way the media portrays him and a lot of books that have been written, they are highly critical of him, and because both from the left and the right initially supported him and ended up being very upset with him and judging him by the withdrawal from Gaza and its aftermath. The left was very much opposed to him. They saw him as this ogre figure, I think, and in the end were not quite supportive of him. But you remember he broke the political mold.
Yes.
He was somebody who took bold moves all his life, and he broke the political mold, did something that people didn't think would be possible, created Kadima, and went on to win a broad support from the Israeli people for a new party, a new initiative. And I think that is what he will be known for. That he did
I
it
hope
his
you're
way,
right. Mm-hmm.
and there was always a consistency. Despite the radical shift that could be pointed to, I went many times with him where he would take me up on the hills and show us the danger of rockets from the West Bank going to Ben Gurion Airport, or the strategic positions and why certain lands were essential for Israel's security. And I don't think he ever wavered. I remember when he took President Bush in a helicopter for a tour of the West Bank when he was still Governor Bush, and what a tremendous impression it made and why their connection was so close from the very beginning, because of that bonding experience that they had.
Very nice. So, Malcolm, while you're still with us, may I ask you for your reaction to one other issue in the news, the academic boycott of Israel by the ASA, the American Studies Association, which was then followed now by a similar academic boycott by the MLS, the Modern Language Association. In your opinion, Malcolm, how serious are these boycotts of Israel in the United States?
Well, as you know, this is a subject you and I have discussed in interviews for a long time.
Yes.
And I've been trying to warn people about the dangers of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions, and the overall global campaign of delegitimization, which was much more fierce and is more fierce in Europe today, but is increasingly in evidence in the United States on campuses across the country. It's affecting every sector of society, union groups, church groups, entertainment, cultural figures. So many, when Pink Floyd and so many other people who boycott Israel, and people tend to dismiss it. It cannot be and should not be dismissed. This is the incarnation of anti-Semitism in the 21st century. In order to bypass the political incorrectness of saying I hate Jews, you say I hate Israel, I hate Zionists, and by portraying it not as a boycott of Jews, but a boycott of the Jewish state, which is the corporate entity. It is the collective entity of the Jewish people and is the representative Jew. Therefore, this is not about policies. This is not about settlements or other things, because they're distorting completely the picture when ASA and others speak about what the boycott does. The boycott, number one, affects 30,000 Palestinians working in the West Bank. It affects their health care when they demand that institutions disassociate from the West Bank or educational institutions. All the universities there were not there because of the Palestinian Authority. They were established under Israeli, quote, occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are many aspects of this. And the campaign here is to deny Israel the right to exist, deny the Jewish people the right to national expression. It is not about a policy difference. That could be legitimately debated. What the ASA did was, the American Studies Association, They have 5,000 members. 3,000 something are eligible to vote. In the end, I think 19% or 16% of their members actually voted for the boycott. It again reminds us of the danger of apathy, indifference. When people didn't vote, if they didn't support it, they should have come out. And now, in immediate aftermath, we started a campaign where we wrote to all the presidents of the universities, which have associations with ASA. A number of them indicated that the ASA listing was not correct, that they were not associated. A number of them indicated that they will pull out and would no longer fund dues to the American Studies Association. But over 160, and by now probably 170 university presidents have come out strongly in condemnation of any boycott of the State of Israel, regardless of the political positions they may or may not hold. I think this is a critical turning point, what happened. And the Modern Language Association had to see that. And they had a panel that was one-sided on the boycott, debating or discussing the boycott issue, but it was all anti-Israel people. There was an alternative panel that was set up to discuss this issue outside the framework, but in the same place as the Modern Language Association meeting. And they now have submitted to their membership. It is not a call to boycott. It's really a criticism. It's a resolution against Israel over lack of access or academic freedom in terms of people getting easily in and out of through the West Bank. When in fact the problem, and when they attack it on Gaza, when they forget that it's Egypt that's in control of the crossing of the Gaza, and that Israel, they talk about Israel's occupation still of Gaza in some of the material from these groups. They forget that Israel is completely withdrawn from Gaza. So this is very significant. Each one of these is a breach in the wall both of decency and of understanding, and it leads to increased bigotry and isolation. It is an attempt to delegitimize and to isolate the Jewish state and ultimately the Jewish people. And nobody should believe they mean them. It means all of us. This is global. You see it with Boudien in France with the Nazi salute, this new neo-Nazi salute. But you see it manifested in many ways, in really scurrilous material and charges not rooted in fact. And Israel's position can be critical of Israel. They don't have to agree with every policy, and you could think that they make mistakes, and they naturally do. But that is not what the issue is here. This is about Israel's right to exist, and this one-sided criticism, setting a standard that is impossible, not recognizing Israel's right to defend itself, the steps they take, and how limited what Israel does compared to what every other country does in order to defend its citizens.
Malcolm, it is always wonderful to talk to you. I wish you safe passage from Greece. Where are you going from Greece?
Well, I'm actually going back to Israel to participate in a conference there, and then we'll be flying back the same day to New York.
Okay. Well, I hope I see you soon in New York. Fly safe, and you know I always appreciate the time with you. Thank you, my friend, very, very much. My conversation with Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Director of the President's Conference. And you know, the MLA that just voted to boycott Israel because it argues that Israel denies American academicians entry into the West Bank. It's interesting. We should all put this charge into perspective. I want to put it in perspective for you. In 2012, only 142 American academicians were denied entry into the West Bank out of 626,000 who applied. That's a denial rate of 0.023%. The United States denial rate in 2012 was 5.4%. 5.4% of the academicians seeking to enter this country were denied. An academic was 200 times less likely to be denied entry by Israel than by the United States. It's something to simply keep in mind. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to the things said on this in the news. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. And once again, this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m., we'll be replaying the memorial service of Ariel Sharon from the Knesset in Jerusalem. If you didn't get a chance to see it the first time, I hope you'll take advantage of that replay this Sunday at 3 p.m. My thanks to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Tisha Bader, and Carol Lilienthal for their help in this edition of In the News. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.